Okay, good morning. We're running just a little late this morning, so my hope was to finish the book of Genesis this morning. We may be able to do that. We'll see. We're going to talk about the story of Joseph this morning. So, as I've said, the book of Genesis consists essentially of four parts. There's the prehistory of Israel in Genesis 1 through 11. There's the story of Abraham. There's the Jacob story. And now the last and final piece is the Joseph story. And just big picture, right? The Joseph story is designed to help us transition into Egypt. So we're going to find out how the people of Israel got into Egypt. And that's where we'll find them when we start the book of Exodus, probably next week. So just a brief encapsulation of the story of Joseph with some emphases. The story begins in Genesis 37. And we've already seen, right, that Abraham's family is characterized by a certain amount of division, competition, dysfunction, and that continues. So let me read to you the first part of the story of Joseph, and then I'll say a couple things about it. And this is picking up in Genesis 37, verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than any of his sons. Obviously, Israel here is Jacob that we saw was renamed. Because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a robe of many colors. When his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his other brothers, they hated him and could not speak peacefully to him. So notice the situation here, right? Joseph is the favored son, or one of the favored sons of Jacob. The other brothers know this, and this is a cause of great animosity, such that the other brothers cannot even sort of hold a civil conversation with their brother Joseph. Now Joseph had a dream, and he told it to his brothers, and they hated him even more. So here's the dream. He said to them, "Hear this dream that I have dreamed. Behold, we were binding sheaves in the field. And behold, my sheaf arose and stood upright. And behold, your sheaves gathered around it and bowed down to my sheaf." His brothers said to him, "Are you indeed to reign over us? Or are you indeed to rule us?" So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. So here we have this situation, right? Joseph has a dream. He dreams that his sheaf that he's been harvesting becomes sort of like the chief sheaf. The sheaves of his brothers bow down to him and worship him. We'll find out this is actually going to come true in just a little bit. But here's what happens. This is Genesis 37:18. Dad sends Joseph out to check on his brothers who are out pasturing the sheep, and this is what happens in Genesis 37:18. They saw him from afar, and before he came near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. They said to one another, "Here comes this dreamer. Come, let us kill him and throw him into one of the pits. And then we will say that a fierce animal has devoured him, and we will see what will become of his dreams." But when Reuben heard it, he rescued him out of their hands, saying, "Let us not take his life." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into the pit here in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him, that he might rescue him out of their hand and restore him to his father." So when Joseph came to his brothers, they stripped him of his robe and the robe of many colors that he wore, and they took him and threw him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. Then they sat down to eat, and looking up, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels bearing gum, balm, and myrrh on their way to carry it down to Egypt. Then Judah said to his brothers, "What profit is it that we kill our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let our hand not be set upon him, for he is our brother, our own flesh." Now, this story, I think, is designed to make us think about another story of rivalry between brothers that we've read about. And of course, this is the story of Cain and Abel back in the 4th chapter of Genesis. And I think one of the emphasis here, right, is once again, we're seeing the effects of sin on human relationships. What happens here is sin pits even brothers against one another, and that kind of sinful sort of mindset leads to jealousy, it leads to competition, and of course it can even lead to murder. And that's what the brothers are contemplating here. They're contemplating on murdering their brother Joseph. They stop short of that, thanks to Reuben, and they simply sell him into slavery. Now I want to skip over to chapter 39. What happens is that Joseph is indeed sold into slavery. And here we just want to remember, right? Joseph here, in effect, becomes a representative of all the people of Israel who are all going to be enslaved in Egypt. So there's something about Joseph here that represents the people of Israel. We'll see there's something about him that represents something else too. I'll get to that before we're over today. Now, things pick up. Joseph is purchased by Potiphar. Potiphar is a kind of royal official. He's a big sort of muckety-muck. And Joseph is purchased. And like a lot of folks who are enslaved, he becomes sort of like a household servant. If you're a Downton Abbey fan, Joseph here becomes Carson the butler, who presides over this great house. Okay, so here's what happens. This is verse 39, chapter 39, verse 2. The Lord was with Joseph, and he became a successful man, and he was in the house of the Egyptian master, and his master saw that the Lord was with him, and the Lord caused all that he did to succeed in his hands. So, explicit mention here, right? God blesses Joseph. Potiphar, the Egyptian official, sees that God blesses Joseph and decides to promote him to kind of being Carson, the presiding officer of the whole household. Now things are going well for a while until another disaster occurs, and that's this. This is the rest of the story starting in chapter 39, verse 7. I'll read it very briefly. Now Joseph was a handsome man in form and appearance, and after a time his master's wife cast her eyes on Joseph and said, "Lie with me." But he refused and said to his master's wife, "Behold, because of my master has no concern about anything in the house, and he has put everything he has in my charge. He is not greater in this house than I am, nor has he kept back anything from me except you, because you are his wife. How then can I do this great wickedness and sin against God?" So notice what happens here. Potiphar's wife is attracted to Joseph, and she basically wants to have a kind of a romantic relationship with him. But Joseph refuses on two grounds, and I think this is really important. Joseph's reasoning here is really important. Joseph says, "No, I can't do this for two reasons. Reason number one, your husband has placed his trust in me, and I'm not going to betray that trust. So, no on that count." And then second of all, Joseph says, look, to do this would also be not only to dishonor your husband, it would also dishonor God. God has blessed me. It's he that's brought me to this position, and so I'm not going to do this because it would dishonor God as well. It's interesting because as we'll see when we get to Exodus, right, we're going to find out that these are the exact two reasons why there's a commandment against adultery. It's a violation of marriage. It's also a violation of God. So Joseph here, in effect, gives the reasons why adultery can't be committed before we find what they are out in the Ten Commandments. So I think that's really interesting. And so he refuses. The story ends up with, as you may know, right, Potiphar's wife kind of forces herself upon him. She kind of grabs a hold of his outer garment. He slips out of it and runs away. When the servants come home, she then kind of falsely reports that he, in effect, has tried to rape her. And this is what she says. This is Genesis 39, verse 17. And she told him the same story, saying that he hears Potiphar. The Hebrew servant whom you have brought among us came in and to laugh at me, but as soon as I lifted up my voice and cried, he left his garment beside me and fled out of the house. The Hebrew servant whom you, my husband, have brought among us, he tried to do this. Now, you may recognize this form here because we've read it before, right? This is exactly what Adam says when God asks him if he's eaten the fruit. Oh, well, I kind of did it, but it's that woman that you gave to me. It's her fault that I ate it. There's another comment about sin here. I think this is really important. Another of the effects of sin, besides the hatred, the animosity, and the bitterness that springs from it, is another fruit of sin is that it leads us to refuse to take responsibility for what we've done. Under sin, right, we can find all kinds of excuses to justify what we've done. It's always somebody else's fault. And so she now blames Potiphar for something that she herself has done. Well, the story goes on. Joseph is put in jail. So notice what's happened here. Thrown in a pit, sold into slavery, rises to be Carson at Downton Abbey, gets put in jail, and now he's in jail. Seemingly he's going to rot away forever. There are two royal officials who are in jail too. They have dreams. Joseph correctly interprets their dreams. And one of the things that happens is later on, Pharaoh has a dream. And Pharaoh's dream is that he sees these kind of 7 sleek, fat cows eaten up by 7 kind of emaciated cows, and 7 wonderful, healthy things of grain eaten up by 7 kind of blighted things of grain. And he wants someone to interpret his dream to him. And so one of the officials said, oh, you know what? When I was in jail, there was a guy down there whose name was Joseph, and he interpreted my dream for him. I bet he could interpret your dream too. And so that's what happens. So in Genesis 41, 14, something important happens. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph, and they quickly brought him out of the pit. Now, another important little thing here that we want to recognize is this phrase, out of the pit, is one of the expressions that the Old Testament uses for death. The Psalms talk about going down to the pit, or someone being afraid of the pit, or someone being lifted up out of the pit, which means they were kind of like just rescued from death. We're being told here, in a kind of roundabout way, that one of the things the story of Joseph is about resurrection. I'll say more about that in just a minute. That is, the theme of resurrection is also floating here in the Joseph story. Well, to make a long story short, Joseph actually does correctly interpret Pharaoh's dream, and he's made prime minister of Egypt. And so what happens is there's a famine all the way throughout the ancient Near East, and what happens is that Israel sends his sons to Egypt to get grain, because Israel has become a kind of a source of food thanks to Joseph. Joseph has taken the 7 good harvests, has put them all in granaries, and so Egypt is the only place now around where you can get food. And guess what happens? Joseph's brothers come to him. They don't recognize him, but guess what happens? They all bow down to him. They come asking for food. Now, once again, compressing things a little bit, there's a dramatic moment when Joseph actually reveals his identity to his brothers, and I want to read it to you because it's really powerful. Joseph has actually been working to get his brothers to bring the youngest brother, Benjamin, and also their father, Joseph Israel, to Egypt because Joseph has come to be aware that everything that's happened to him has happened for a reason. Everything that's just happened to him has been so that the family of Abraham can be saved from famine back in Canaan. And so he's actually working to get his whole family into Egypt where they can be preserved. And there's this dramatic moment in chapter 45 where Joseph reveals his identity to his brothers. And let me just read it to you, because the only way you can do justice to it is to read it. Interpretation here kind of will fall short. So here's what happens. Then Joseph could not control himself before all those who stood by him. And he cried, "Make everyone go out from me." So no one stayed with him when Joseph made himself known to his brothers. And he wept aloud so that the Egyptians heard it, and the household of Pharaoh heard it. And Joseph said to his brothers, "I am Joseph. Is my father still alive?" But his brothers could not answer him, for they were dismayed at his presence. They're saying, this is the kid that we were going to kill, that we threw in the pit, that we sold into slavery, and now he's the most powerful man in Egypt. This is like not turning out well. Notice what Joseph says. So Joseph said to his brothers, "Come here to me, please." And they came near, and he said, "I am your brother Joseph, whom you sold into Egypt. And now do not be distressed or angry with yourselves because you sold me. For God sent me before you to preserve life. For the famine has been in the land, and in these 2 years, and there are yet 5 years in which there will be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to preserve you as a remnant on the earth, to keep alive for you many survivors. So it was not you who sent me here, but God. And he made me a father to Pharaoh, and lord of all his house, and a ruler over all the land of Egypt. Hurry up and go to my father and say to him, 'Thus says your son Joseph, God has made me lord over all Egypt.'" Now, this is the really important point. It's a deeply theological point, so I want to stress it in the couple minutes that we have left, and then I'm going to read to you the very end of the story. Genesis is making a really important point here, and that's this. How is it that we can actually come to a moment where we forgive people who have wronged us? How can we get to that point, right, where we let go of our bitterness, our hatred, our envy, and be in a position to forgive and to reconcile? And the Genesis answer to that question is there's only one thing, and that's the grace of God. The thing that's crucial here is Joseph's knowledge that everything that's happened has happened at God's orchestration and God's purpose. And that's the thing that allows him to forgive his brothers. It's really, really quite amazing. Let me read to you the end of the story. So Jacob Israel eventually is brought to Egypt. Joseph settles his family in Goshen, the richest farmland in all of Egypt. Jacob dies, and now his brothers are really, really afraid because, right, they think, okay, Dad's dead, and now Joseph is going to take his revenge on us. Dad's out of the way, and now Joseph is going to really get us. Here's what Joseph says to his brothers. When Joseph's brothers saw that his father was dead, they said, "It may be that Joseph will hate us and pay us back for all the evil we did to him." So they sent a message to Joseph saying, "Your father gave this command before he died. Say to Joseph, please forgive the transgression of your brothers and their sin because they did evil to you. And now please forgive the transgressions of your servants, the God of your father." Joseph wept and spoke to them. So notice what they do. His brothers actually lie and say, "You know what? Just before Dad died, we asked him if he had a final wish. And here's what he told us. Dad said, 'Tell Joseph that the last thing I want from him is to forgive you.'" Okay, that's what I really, really want. That's my dying wish. Of course, it's all a lie. Here's what Joseph says. Joseph wept when they spoke to him. His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, "Behold, we are your servants." But Joseph said to them, "Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant it evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear, I will provide for you and your little ones." Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them. Notice what's being said here. Joseph says, look, yeah, I fully acknowledge what you were doing. You tried to do evil to me. But God took the evil that you did and used it for good to fulfill the promise that he made to our grandfather, Abraham. God's been in this all along, and everything that's happened to me has actually been in accordance with his purpose. So I want to draw two conclusions here from the story of Joseph as we get ready to march into Exodus. Conclusion number one. God is not only the creator of the universe, he's also very much providentially involved in everything that goes on in it. But here's a lesson that we really need to learn. God's providence doesn't mean that everything goes the way that we want to, or that nothing bad ever happens. God's providence does not mean that everything always goes right for us and that nothing bad ever happens. Joseph is the example here of that this is not true. Some awful things may happen to us. That doesn't mean, however, that God's providence is absent. Second thing that we want to draw from this story is this. Joseph here is an important figure, and I want to suggest something. I'll say more about this as we goes on, but I want to say that one of the things that's happening here in the person of Joseph is we're getting an outline of the person of Christ. Notice what happens here. Here we have a character who has to undergo immense suffering in order to help his family to good. They despise him. They attempt to murder him. They don't seem to be very appreciative of what he's done. But he does it anyway because he recognizes that he's on a mission from God. Does any of this sound familiar? Joseph, in many ways, is kind of a prefiguration, an outline, or a beginning of the outline of the portrait of Christ. We'll see how we get more of these as we go on in the Old Testament. Now, one final thing, and we'll be ready to start the book of Exodus. I think there's a big question here, and we're not given an answer. So I'm going to ask a question, I'm going to give a partial answer, and then we'll stop. So if God's providence is always at work, right? If nothing happens outside of God's providence, why do really evil things happen? Right? Why do they happen? Right? Why do bad things, both small and large, occur? I don't think that the book of Genesis really gives us an answer to that question. I think what it does is it points us in the direction of an answer, insofar as we will have an answer in this life. And hint, we will not have a complete answer to that question in this life. Okay, just so you know. I'm not going to promise that in 5 sessions I'm going to give you the answer to that question. Okay. I think what we can say is this. God allows evil to occur because he can bring good out of it. And we're going to see here that there's one great, tremendous example of that. We will get to it when we get to the New Testament. That event will take place on Good Friday, where the most awful thing in the world occurs. And God uses the most awful thing in the world to bring about good. God allows evil to occur because he can bring good out of it. We'll start the book of Exodus next week, which is actually a really wonderful book. And that'll get us ready to go on to the book of Leviticus. And I've got Leviticus t-shirts for you printed already. Leviticus with an exclamation point.